What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. It's Thursday, time to go game by game, talk about all the players I'd be starting and sitting this week. Gonna be a long one. Sit back, hit the like button. Let's get things started off. The Thursday night game, Commanders at Eagles, 48.5 point total. Eagles 3.5 point home favorites. For the Commanders, big news is Brian Robinson. Don't know if he's going to play. Hasn't played the last few games with the hamstring injury. We will see when the reports come out on Thursday later in that day. That's probably the best reports that we have. I'm projecting him in right now. Doesn't really matter though. We'll go over both scenarios. If he is in, it means that he's good to go. It means that they're not, super worried. You could always suffer a setback when you have a hamstring injury, but they wouldn't be super worried that he has a severe risk of suffering that setback. So I would just play him as a low end running back too. And then that would move Eckler to more of like a lower end flex play, someone with kind of a limited ceiling and floor, not someone I'd really want to be starting. If B-Rob is out, Eckler moves right back to basically the strong start running back to he's been the last few weeks. Outside of those two, Daniels must start. I think McLaurin's a must start as well. He projects more as like a strong start at wide receiver. Eagles grade out as a poor matchup for all positions, but McLaurin has been incredible. We should also expect this game to be roughly close to trailing for the Commanders. It's unlikely, not impossible, but unlikely they get up big, run the ball a ton, and we don't see that much volume for McLaurin. The odds are, the most likely outcome is that it is at minimum a close-ish game or that the Commanders are trailing, so he should be relatively decently involved. He's averaging 13 expected points per game on the season. I'm projecting him a little bit under that, but not by a whole lot. Again, he doesn't project amazingly, but I have him in one league. I've just played him every week. I feel like everyone else has done the same. I don't know why you'd go away from him this week. And then Ertz, only other real play, projecting is a pretty low-end tight end too. Third worst matchup for tight ends on the week. And despite 20 targets over the last 3 weeks, he only has 113 yards, 0 touchdowns, very low efficiency. Not a great play this week. For the Eagles side, it is a mostly neutral matchup, but it does favor wide receivers over tight ends. Regardless, Hurts, Saquon, Brown, Devonta Smith, I would say they're all must starts. Maybe you can throw Devonta Smith into a strong start. Dallas Goedert, grading out as my tight end 9 right now. It's like a low end tight end 1. I'd probably play him. Devonta Smith definitely had a worse game than expected last week, especially if you look at the box score and you're like, they scored, 34 points? How did he do absolutely nothing? I wouldn't expect the same this week, but you got to know sometimes with the Eagles, if they run for all of their touchdowns, if they get up by 1 million points, that can just happen. In the Eagles' 2 wins by at least 25 points this season, Devonta Smith has 12 total yards in those 2 games. All the other 6 games that he played, he has at least 64 yards. So I think you're playing him this week. I think that he's going to have a much better game than last week, but with the understanding that it is the Eagles, they could very easily run for all of their touchdowns. No London game, no Munich game this week. So 1 o'clock kickoff. We'll start off with Rams at Patriots, 43.5 point total. Rams 4.5 point road favorites. For the Rams, pretty simple. Just start their core. Kyron, Kupp, Puka. Start them every week. Stream the others as needed. This week, maybe it's needed because maybe there's some good teams on bye, but it's not a great spot. I would more stream these other guys in a shootout, in a dome game, in a spot where we can expect a lot of production. The total is low. The game is outdoors. They're on the road. The Patriots defense isn't elite, but they definitely have their moments. They definitely have some good players that can step up and really make life just tough for the opponent. So not really a spot I want to stream Stafford, use Demarcus Robinson. If you need a tight end streamer, Davis Allen jumped to an 80% snap share last week. He had the 4th highest route share among all tight ends. He even ran 4 routes from out wide, 7 from the slot. Again, probably don't need to use him, but some of you might need to. He's probably available in pretty much every league. Maybe Christian Gonzalez continues shutting down a wide receiver, and so maybe there's a few more targets to go around for tight ends. But again, I'm not going to project as an amazing play. Then for the Patriots, it's not great. I mean, the matchup is neutral, so I wouldn't worry about that. But May, Stevenson, they're the only 2 projecting for at least 8.5 or averaging at least 8.5 expected points per game in the season. The volume just really isn't there for anyone. Douglas, Henry, Booty, they're all going to have their moments. They're all going to have decent games followed by really bad games. They're going to be very up and down. all are just fringe plays. I'd say Booty especially, like you better be in a pretty deep league if you're starting him. I'd say Henry's probably the one with the most appeal. Such should be just because, tight end, you don't have to do that much to be a good tight end play. He only has 1 touchdown, but Kittle, Kelsey, and Kate Otten are the only 3 tight ends with more red zone targets and more targets into the 10-yard line than Hunter Henry. So the touchdowns are maybe coming, hopefully, for Hunter Henry. So if you wanted to use him, I'd be okay with that. It's not like there's any, if someone's going to project in that general tight end 9 through 17 range, they're not a bad play. Everyone in that range, you got to expect, is not going to do anything unless they score. And you know what? If he's getting that much involvement in the red zone, he's got a decent chance of scoring. So totally fine with him. And then going back to Stevenson, again, he's fine. Like a low-end tight end too, like he pretty much always is. Right now he's running at 22. Again, that's going to fluctuate as I kind of like do the projections throughout the week, but he'd be totally fine. There's also I kind of talk sometimes about a clear cutoff that we've seen the last 2 weeks, especially at running back. No clear cutoff this week. It's kind of even. So there's like a clear top 16. All of those are probably must starts. That whole like 17 through like 30, 33 range. Again, no clear cutoff, kind of an even amount there. So low end running back 2 for Stevenson. Next up, we've got Raiders at Dolphins, 44.5 point total. Dolphins, 7.5 point home favorites. For the Raiders, the Dolphins are a poor matchup for all positions besides running back. The problem is, how can you really trust any of the Raiders running backs? Madison dropped to a 39% snap share before their bye. They went to a 3 running back committee. I'm not trusting a 3 running back committee on a trash offense, especially as more than a touchdown road underdog. Even coming off bye. And you think about, coming off bye, maybe they're like fresh. They have a good game plan. But also, remember, teams change their offenses plenty. They change opportunity shares plenty coming off bye. So unless we get a report that it's like we are expecting to feature Alexander Madison, I'm staying away from this backfield. Like we would need some sort of report. I have no idea what the backfield is going to do. Don't trust them. 2 players I'm not shying away from, though, are Myers and Bowers. You all know I love Myers. I think he's super underrated. I'd be playing him as wide receiver 2, maybe in the flex spot if you had him this week. I don't think you were considering benching Bowers, but if you were, I would suggest you start him. Those 2 are going to have massive opportunity shares and what's not a good matchup with the Dolphins, but a matchup where they're probably going to be trailing, probably going to have to throw it. One of them is probably going to have a really good game. I'd start them both. Then for the Dolphins, they've definitely underperformed this season. Even in the games that Tua has played, they have not played super well. Tyreek Hill has that torn ligament. That provides some sort of reason as to why we've seen a decline in usage. I mean, I think you still kind of have to play him. Obviously, we're not expecting the production that he has had in the past, but he could pretty easily have 5 for 122 anytime he steps onto the football field. So don't expect the same production. Don't expect the production that we expected when we were drafting the season, but he's a good play. Like, he's just always a good play and replays. Actually, a pretty tough matchup for the wide receivers. Raiders force a drop in both yards per reception and catch rate to wide receivers. The matchup accounts to roughly a 1 point per game drop for all wide receivers. So again, you're starting Tyreek Hill, but honestly, for Waddle, boom bust flex play, but he's been doing a lot more busting than booming this season. I'd honestly say that Tyreek Hill, Devon Achane, they're the only 2 must starts. Waddle's a low end play. Jonnu's a mediocre play at tight end. You can stream Tua if you need him, but he's a quarterback that, again, the offense hasn't been clicking. They run for a ton of touchdowns, and he's not mobile, and they don't want him to run. So he's not that great of streaming option. I would really only want to play Hill and Achane. Next up, we've got a classic game between the Packers and the Bears. Low, 40.5 point total. Packers, 6.5 point road favorites coming off of their bye. For the Packers, at Chicago, not a great spot, not a spot you want to be in. And only the running backs are grading out as having an above average matchup. Love, my quarterback 10, Jacobs, running back 13, Jayden Reed, wide receiver 17, Dobbs, wide receiver 38, Wicks, Watson in that like 50 to 55 range, and Tucker Kraft is my tight end 8. So I think you're playing Love, Jacobs, Reed, and Kraft. I think Dobbs is kind of a fringe option. I will say I'd be totally fine if you had to bench Jordan Love in this spot. The Bears have the 2nd worst matchup for quarterbacks on the week. They are best attacked on the ground. I could see the Packers getting up in the spot, leaning on the ground game, limiting pass attempts, and especially if the Bears offense can't get going. We'll talk about them in a second, but if they can't get going, there's no reason for the Packers to be super aggressive through the air. So all of that would, of course, be like a very bad thing for Jordan Love. The best case for these like fringe Packers players is that the Bears can keep pace. But even with the new offensive coordinator, I just don't have a ton of faith in the Bears offense this weekend. So the likelihood is the Packers aren't going to be pushed super hard, so they're probably going to have to win efficiency, which again, they can. And I listed off, those are still pretty good projections for Packers players. So I think you can still play all these Packers guys this weekend. Besides Watson and Wicks, not that great of plays. But yeah, for the Bears side, like Swift is definitely the best play. He's been running back 18. But the Packers are the second worst matchup for opposing wide receivers on the week. And while they're a great matchup for tight ends, I mean, you can't really trust Cole Kmet right now. So unless you're in a deeper format and you just want to plug him in there and just pray, like he's not that great of a play. I think all of Moore, Odunze, Allen are playable in the flex spot. You're basically hoping that the play calling improves, that they fall behind the Packers or they get up because of those guys. But if they fall behind, if they're going to need to pass the ball, but they're only really projecting those three wide receivers in that like wide receiver 40 to 45 range. That's not amazing. That's a very low end flex play. I just think talent wise, the talent's there. Opportunity wise, we know they're probably going to throw the ball. It's the play calling. It's the play calling and how Caleb Williams has been performing. So if you had to play in the flex, I wouldn't feel bad about it. There's some other wide receivers that project in that same general range where you're like, you know, there's no sort of ceiling. There's a ceiling still for these wide receivers. So I'd be fine playing them. You just can't expect like a ton of production. I have faith that this offense will turn things around, just not that it'll happen this week. Next up, we've got Jaguars at Lions, 47-point total. Lions, 13-point home favorites. For the Jaguars, awful matchup for running backs and tight ends. And while it used to be an elite matchup for wide receivers, that advantage has slowly dwindled recently with the Lions pass defense really stepping it up. The Lions are now forcing the second lowest EPA per pass attempt on the season. They're forcing the third lowest schedule adjusted yards per reception to wide receivers and the 11th lowest schedule adjusted catch rate to wide receivers. The only reason this grades out as a slightly positive matchup is because you can't run on them. They really limit tight end production. Their offense scores a ton. And so what happens is you have to throw it. You can't use running backs. You're limiting your production to tight ends. And so you just got to pepper wide receivers with targets. Even if they're more inefficient than usual, they get so many targets where it helps them a little bit. Said differently, expect a ton of volume to flow through wide receivers here, or at least a lot more volume than usually expected for the Jaguars, but also expect extreme inefficiency for all players, making them not that great of plays. Etienne, running back 28. Tank, assuming he plays, running back 34. Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver 34. And then Evan Ingram, tight end 7 right now, but I feel like I might drop that a little bit later in the week. I'm truly not expecting any good games from these guys this weekend, but I would say if Tank Bigsby were to miss, I'd be still a little bit excited to play Travis Etienne. Outside of that, though, like, and then maybe putting Brian Thomas Jr. in the flex spot and hoping he hits for a big play, especially with Mac Jones at quarterback. You can't expect much from the Jaguars this weekend. Then for the Lions, despite what you saw from the Vikings last week, the Jaguars are an elite matchup for all positions. They drove the field fine, the Vikings last week. It just like they kind of fell apart in the red zone and had these turnovers. Don't expect the Lions to have the same result. So Goff grades out as an exceptional play this week. I'll caution that he has a lot of variance. We could see them get up 21-0 on the back of just 3 rushing touchdowns. And if that happens, I mean, you saw what happened against the Titans, right? Like, they got up through a number of ways that were not necessarily Jared Goff. And he had what, like, I don't want to say too low here, but wasn't it like under 100 passing yards? Like, he didn't do anything because they didn't have to. They got up by 1 million points. And that's kind of what we project happening this week. If they get up really early and it is on the back of these running backs, he could throw for under 150 yards. And then he definitely needs 3 touchdowns. And if they got up early on the running backs, he didn't have necessarily 3 touchdowns. But it projects well because the flip side is also true. They're expected to score 30 points on average. So they could easily push into the upper 30s. That means that he has 4, 5 touchdowns theoretically in his range of outcomes. Even 2 or 3 touchdowns is still a really good day for a quarterback this season. And so I think if you got Goff or you have the option to play him, I probably would this weekend. So I would say all of Goff, Gibbs, St. Brown, Laporta. They're all grading out as must starts, with Montgomery not grading out as a must start, but let's be honest, your 13-point home favorites projected to score 30 points. Dave Montgomery is scoring a touchdown this weekend, so I would play him. And then J-Mo projecting as the wide receiver 25. Again, if they get up quickly, maybe he doesn't do anything, but if you had to play him, there's going to be plenty of opportunities for this team, plenty of opportunities for them to get him involved as well. I think if you've got a Lions player, you just got to play him and hope that the touchdown's going to flow through your guy. Next up, we've got Browns at Saints, 44.5-point total. Saints 1-point home favorites. For the Browns, this is an elite matchup for running backs and a neutral one for all other positions. Saints are allowing the second highest EPA per rush attempt, the sixth highest rushing yards over expectation per carry, second most yards before contact per carry, and the most schedule-adjusted fantasy points to the position on the week, with the Panthers on bye. If there was ever a spot for Nick Chubb to get going, it is this one. If you have him, you are starting him this weekend. It's also worth noting that this is a revenge game for Jameis Winston. In his two starts, he's had 41 and 46 pass attempts. So you got revenge game. You've got them leaning pass heavy. With him at quarterback, you've got a beatable defense. Maybe they change things up post-bye. Maybe if Chubb really gets going, they lean on him. But it's a good spot. Like, the Browns are probably going to do decently well this weekend. I would be fine. He's not a must play, but I'd be totally fine streaming Jameis Winston this weekend. I think Tillman, Judy, both absolutely flex viable. Elijah Moore, I think he's more flex viable in like a full PPR format, and half PPR, I'd maybe shy away from using him in the flex spot, but second flex spot, wide receiver 3 spot, totally fine with that. Njoku, I think he's a great play. I think right now he's projecting as my 10-1 in the week. It'll probably come back a little bit from there, but if you have Dave Njoku, you're playing him. And this is all only projecting the Browns to score 2.25 offensive touchdowns, which is what we're projecting them to score on average. This is an offense where they could score 3-4 touchdowns. That could absolutely happen this weekend. And so given the average volume we're expecting, given that we kind of know where it's going, and given that we have a high touchdown potential here, I definitely think as a tiebreaker, you want to be starting Browns players this weekend. Then for the Saints, you can really only trust Kamara and Taysom Hill. I'm not about to play MVS. I know a lot of people spent a lot of fab on him. It wasn't me. I don't trust him. He could certainly do well again. He could certainly hit for a big play, but you better be pretty desperate if you're using him this weekend. So start Kamara. Taysom Hill, tight end 12. He's got a pretty decent chance of scoring a touchdown, but he'll definitely need to, and especially in full PPR, he'll need to score a touchdown. He's the tight end 12 and half PPR, but tight end 18 in full PPR. I would not love playing him in full PPR. Next up, we've got the Vikings at the Titans, 39.5-point total. Vikings 6-point road favorites. For the Vikings, they looked awful last week. Though, to be fair, if you take one or two of these huge mistakes from Sam Darnold out, those interceptions they had in the red zone, you take one or two of those out and you convert them to touchdowns, it wasn't all that bad of a day. So it really just was a few horrible mistakes that kind of cost them, not cost them the game, it still won, but cost them good production and fantasy. This week, they are taking on a much stronger Titans defense. The defense that's allowed by far the fewest passing yards per game in the league. Teams are choosing to run the ball against the Titans at one of the highest rates in the league, just because of a mixture of them having a strong pass defense and also a bad offense, right? That can't really keep pace. And so if we see, which we thought would happen last week, it didn't happen, but if we see the Vikings get ahead and we see the Titans really struggle on offense, you would think that passing volume would be limited. Again, we thought that would happen last week in a much easier matchup, and it didn't. So these things are not guarantees to happen, but I do expect them to look a little bit better. I don't expect them to be horrible this week. Jefferson, must start. Hawkinson, strong start. Sam Darnold, mediocre streaming option, not a great play. Again, they really, really limit passing volume. I still like Sam Darnold, but when you're going up against a team that limits passing volume by far the most in the NFL, it's not going to be a good matchup, especially when you don't typically have super high volume to begin with. So I would probably try and bench Darnold this weekend. And then Addison, also not a great play. I'd probably bench him. Aaron Jones, of course, if he starts, you're definitely playing him. If Aaron Jones misses, technically, Akers is the backup. Akers would be the one getting the early down work, the goal line work, but they'd still use Ty Chandler as like a passing down back. It's not an amazing spot for running back. Like, I'd like Aaron Jones because he's featured when he plays and he's better than those two. If you're going to those two, maybe Akers is a pretty low-end play, but I wouldn't be excited about either one of them. But yeah, Hawkinson especially. I would still definitely play Hawkinson. Snaps only went up by 1%, but route participation went way up. Good news for his potential moving forward. Then for the Titans, Will Levis takes a ton of sacks. The Vikings defense not only is confusing for young quarterbacks, it's difficult for them to really know what's happening, who's coming on the blitz, because they do blitz a lot, but they also generate a ton of pressure. And so you don't know who's coming. They're going to generate pressure. You can't diagnose the defense, and then you're sacked. And you're a quarterback that's also not that good, who has some good players, but not many. And you just take a lot of sacks. Like, it's not a good spot. Vikings have also allowed the second fewest rushing yards per game. They rank first in EPA per rush allowed, second fewest rushing yards before contact per carry. It's a bad spot. It is just a bad spot for the Titans. Pollard, Ridley, the only two you can consider, but the grade out is my running back 24, wide receiver 23 right now, and I could see that shifting down. Pollard can only get so low because he gets so many touches that even if he's really inefficient, if you get 15 to 17 touches, you have to be pretty terrible to not score some fantasy points. But yeah, both are definitely more in the fringes this week than they usually are. Next up, great matchup between the Ravens and the Steelers, one of the more exciting games on the week. 48.5 point total. Ravens 3-point road favorites. For the Ravens, Lamar, Henry, Flowers, all must starts this weekend. Tight end comes down to Isaiah Likely. Andrews had the second highest route participation among all tight ends last week when Likely missed. If Likely misses again, he will be a must start as a tight end one yet again. If Likely returns, Andrews probably drops down to more of like a low end tight end one. Your fringe option is Rashad Bateman. I don't think I trust him personally, but the snaps are there. He could always hit for a big play. Isn't really the type of matchup he typically does best in. It is a really strong defense. Also, in 4 career games against Pittsburgh, he has maxed out at 22 receiving yards. So I'm not expecting much from him. I'd want to be in a pretty deep format or have like a lot of flex spots to be using him. And then that kind of transitions over to Deontay. But Deontay, we knew he wouldn't have a role in the first week. They literally told us how many snaps he was going to play, and he played that exact amount of snaps. Then a couple days later, they play their next game, so his role was not going to expand. Now they've had time. So maybe he gets more snaps. Maybe we hear a report on how many snaps he's going to play. But even if they say he's going to see like an increase in snaps, they want to get him to like 30, 40 snaps, I'm not starting Deontay Johnson until he plays well, until he has a role on this offense, which genuinely, I don't want to scare people, but it might not happen this season. Like, it truly might not happen to where he actually has a role where you're starting him in fantasy. He might be the third wide receiver to Rashad Bateman, and we're not really starting Bateman. So that gives you some sort of outlook there. Again, he has upside in the fantasy playoffs, but right now you cannot trust Deontay Johnson until you actually see him perform on this offense. Then for the Steelers, smash spot for the passing attack. They're allowing 30 more passing yards per game than the next worst team. They're also allowing the most passing touchdowns, 6th most time to throw. Russ is a great streaming option this week. Pickens is a must start. I wish we could trust the snaps for Mike Williams. If this was like in 3 weeks, he'd be a must start as well, but I don't trust that he's going to play more than like 20 or 30 snaps. And I would like him to play more than that if I'm going to start him in fantasy, unless we get some sort of report that he's a full snap share, which I don't think we're going to get. It's still too early from when he joined the team. But unless that were to happen, I think you got to just put him on the bench, hope that he goes out there and plays all the snaps, and then you can use him moving forward. For the running backs, awful matchup, so neither one of them are very good plays. Watch the status of Najee Harris. Watch his status throughout the week, but assuming he's good to go, which I think he is, neither one grades out as a top 25 running back. I'd be okay benching both Najee and Warren. Baltimore's allowing 73 rushing yards per game and 3.4 yards per carry. No, thank you. Only other play is Pat Freiermuth. He's a mid-range tight end too. He would probably just need to get lucky and score a touchdown. I'm not expecting any sort of like increased volume for him this week. Final 1 o'clock game is Colts at Jets. 44-point total. Jets are 4-point home favorites. For the Colts, the Flacco experience was a disaster. They're going back to Richardson at quarterback. I understand. They said that rest of season. They said they don't want him looking over the shoulder. Richardson's quarterback rest of season. I understand that us as fantasy players, greatly prefer Joe Flacco as quarterback because the catchable targets are up. He makes mistakes, which puts them into passing situations. But in terms of actual NFL football, Joe Flacco has been awful. And there's a very real chance, it's not a guarantee, and they could still be 0-2 in the last 2 starts. There's a very real chance that with Richardson at quarterback, they win their last 2 games. So again, huge downgrade in fantasy. But in real life, Anthony Richardson does give them the best chance of winning these games. And that's what the Colts actually care about. That's why he's the quarterback moving forward. And because Flacco's like 1 billion years old, you know Flacco's not the long-term option at quarterback, right? He's going to probably retire next season. You have to figure out what to do with Anthony Richardson. So again, it makes complete sense. They're going to go back to him. For fantasy, though, my initial projections are AR, mid-range quarterback 2, quarterback 17 right now. I just did those projections, but he'll probably end up in that 14 to 18 range is what I would guess. JT's running back 1, play him every week. I don't care who the quarterback is. I could be quarterback, play Jonathan Taylor. But then the wide receivers get hit. Downs right now is my wide receiver 37. Mitchell, Pierce outside the top 50, and that's projecting Pittman out. I don't know the status of that yet, but if he is in, he would come in past 37. Downs would get a downgrade, so he'd come in, they'd all come in outside the top 40. There'd be a very real chance you are not playing any of the Colts wide receivers, especially if Pittman is out, but you don't even have to play Josh Downs, even if Pittman is out. But again, if Pittman does return, none of these guys are going to grade out very well. This is the second worst possible matchup for wide receiver catch percentage. And in Anthony Richardson starts, Colts wide receivers already have the fewest catchable targets in the league. So it is not a good spot for these wide receivers, not a good spot for Anthony Richardson, but that's nothing new to him. So far this season, Anthony Richardson has made starts twice against the Texans, once against the Packers, Bears, Steelers, Dolphins, and now Jets. So including this week, he has faced 0 below average defenses. Absolutely brutal. Makes sense. He's struggled. Of course, he's still been much, much worse than expected. And again, is a very big fantasy downgrade to the offense. On the Jets side, same as last week and same as every week moving forward. Start Adams, Wilson, Breece Hall, bench everyone else. I would say maybe you could stream Aaron Rodgers this weekend. I'm always hesitant to stream him because he's going to run for 1 or -1 yards. He's not going to run for anything. So you have to get north of 250 passing, at least 2 passing touchdowns. And even in a good spot, that's obviously not guaranteed. But we can expect with Anthony Richardson starting elevated plays for the Jets. And given that the Colts are still a positive matchup, he could still go north of 250, get to 260, 270 passing yards. He could throw for 3 passing touchdowns. So not a super high ceiling, but if you had to stream Rodgers this weekend, it'd be a decent time to do so. 4 o'clock games kick off with Seahawks at 49ers, 49.5 point total. 49ers are 6.5 point home favorites. For the Seahawks, it's not a great matchup on the road against a strong defense, but we at least know where the volume is going on this offense, so it makes them easier to project, and it makes it easier for them to have really good games in really difficult matchups. I'm currently projecting Metcalf to play. I don't know yet if that's going to happen, but it kind of seems like that's the case. If he does play, Ken Walker is a must start. Metcalf is a strong start. They're not going to put him out there if he's not good to go. So if Metcalf plays any week, I don't care what the matchup is, you pretty much just have to play him. And then JSN would be really good in the flex spot. Geno, solid quarterback too, a decent streaming option. And then Lockett would be a fairly low-end tight end play, and I wouldn't play any of the tight ends. The biggest change here is basically JSN and Metcalf. If Metcalf plays, play him. If Metcalf is out, it elevates JSN to a really strong play, someone that would probably be a must play. But then if Metcalf is in, JSN does take the back seat. The hope is after that monster game, they realize how good he is, right? They don't put him back in that reduced role, but we have seen it before where you have an injury, he goes off, we're like, oh, nice. He's going to have this really strong workload moving forward. And then they put him right back into the box. They put him into this reduced role, low ADOT, no deep routes, and you're like, what the heck? You just saw what he's capable of. Why would you put him back into this role? So it's not a guarantee. If Metcalf returns, JSN still has a strong role, but it's a chance, and I would take that chance. I would play JSN pretty much regardless this weekend. And for the 49ers, pretty easy. McCaffrey, Purdy, Debo, Kittle, all must starts. Juwan Jennings is a strong start. Pearsall, Flex viable, again, still prefer Juwan over Pearsall, but still love Pearsall long-term. And every week he develops a little bit more. And if you're on the 49ers, that's the key, right? If you're on the 49ers, you can score a long touchdown. They're projected for over 28. They probably will be every week this season. If it is close, just play a 49ers players, just moving forward, like every single week. If it is close, 49ers player, not 49ers player, play the player on the 49ers. Next up, we've got Falcons at Broncos, 44-point total. Broncos, 2.5-point home favorites. For the Falcons at Denver, not a fun place to play. They are a poor matchup all around, slightly positive for running backs thanks to allowing a decent amount of receptions, but on average, I would just say poor matchup. You're playing at Denver, particularly wide receivers. It is not a good spot for the wide receivers. London, Mooney, they're seeing enough volume to where, like, I don't think I'd bench London in really any matchup. And honestly, Mooney's been playing so good that it's like I really would want to use him in the flex spot too in every spot. The expectation is basically reduce him by like 1.5 or so. Like it just in general, reduce him by that much from what you were normally expecting. And that probably still makes both of them plays that you can trust. I would just say ceiling wise, it really just makes it so that like neither of these guys are going to go out there and drop a complete nuke unless there's like a busted coverage deep downfield. But the odds of doing that against a really strong defense are still minimal. So I think I'd definitely play London. I think if you had to play Mooney in the flex, that'd be fine. Just again, reduce your expectations for these two. Wouldn't want to stream Cousins though. You definitely have better options than Kirk Cousins this weekend. Odds are he does not have a great game through the air. So start Bijan. Pitts is like a high-end tight end too. You can definitely play him. London, Mooney. I think it just comes down to what you have on your team. Don't feel bad about playing either one of them. Again, it's like 1.5. Whatever you normally expect for these two, drop by 1.5. That's what you should basically expect. Then for the Broncos, I'm excited to see what they do at running back. You all know I'm really high on Audric Estime as just like a prospect. I think this season, I'm still a little bit scared of the ceiling because I don't think they're going to use him a lot in the receiving game. I don't think they're ever going to give him like an 80% workload. But if you look at last week, it was a really strong workload. He had 14 touches to only 5 for these other two combined. He's one fumble away from not getting touches. It was one game, so we don't know if that's going to stick long term, but I'm cautiously optimistic. Like that was a brutal matchup last week. He still played pretty well. Much better matchup this week. I have a dynasty league where I drafted him. I have 3 flex spots. I'm still probably not playing him. So again, good spot for him. Good opportunity. I'm still a little bit hesitant, but if a report comes out where they're like, they are expecting Estime to get the vast majority of touches, you know, to get the bulk of the carries. If that sort of report comes out, I don't know. I might throw him in there to that third flex spot. Like I wouldn't feel terrible about using him as a low end running back too. I have Kyron Achane, so he's not passing those two. But I think the point is if we get the report, because that's what we're basically missing right now, is a report that kind of confirms he's our guy this week. You still have the risk of a fumble and then benching him for that. But it takes away that risk that they go out there, have a 300-back committee, and he does nothing. So realistically, Sutton, just keep playing him every week at wide receiver 2. Maybe stream Nix if you need him. Nothing stands out for him this week. He's fine. But Estime is that one other play where if you had to use him at running back 2, it would be fine. I'm still a little bit hesitant. Final 4 o'clock game. This is going to be what I'm going to. Chiefs at Bills, 46-point total. Bills, 2.5-point home favorites. For the Chiefs, the Bills are most attackable on the ground, and Kareem Hunt has touch totals over the last 5 weeks of 28, 24, 22, 28, and 21. He has not yet hit 4 yards per carry in a game. He somehow only has 1 play. I just listed off a ton of touches. 1 touch over 15 yards. He is not explosive. He is not efficient. He has been bad, but they keep feeding him, and so you got to just keep playing him. Any running back getting 20 touches every week with all the goal line work on Kansas City needs to be started. I think what this really points to is they're just giving him a million touches because they're like, whatever, I don't even care if he gets hurt. We're playing fine. Just we're waiting for Pacheco. We trust him to not fumble. We trust him to do fine, do pass protection fine, like not be in the wrong spot. Give him a million touches. I think this is, if you have Pacheco, I mean, wheels up. If he returns to the fantasy playoffs and he actually gets this sort of workload, he is going to win people leagues, which is wild to say because he basically has not played this season. But yeah, play Kareem Hunt. Kelsey's a must start. Mahomes right now is my quarterback 9. Pretty good play. I'm playing him over Caleb Williams this week. Hopkins, wide receiver 21. Tough to know if we're in for more of a shootout or a defensive game. That basically just comes down to the Bills side. If Amari plays, if Dalton Kincaid plays, Buffalo's in an okay spot. They play well at home. They could move the ball. They could force Kansas City to be aggressive, and we get a shootout here. But if those guys are kind of out, if the Bills struggle, they don't push the ball, they don't perform that well, KC has no problem slowing this game down, driving the field slowly 4 or 5 yards at a time, not taking any chances, not turning it over, keeping it close, and winning a close game late. So I think it all comes down to the Buffalo side. We'll break that down in a second. But again, I think you're starting Mahomes, Hunt, Hopkins, and Kelsey because the potential for this offense is great enough to where I'd want to be playing them this weekend. For that Bills side, again, it comes down to injuries. I'm just going to update the projections. You kind of have to just look at that later in the week. But I'd start Cooper if he plays. I'd start Kincaid if he plays. I'd probably start Shakir no matter what. And then, of course, if, like Allen, Cook, just play them obviously no matter what. I would say the one big thing is because if like Cooper's out, we already know Keon Coleman's out, and you're not starting the other wide receivers, so it'd really just be Shakir there. The big one is Kincaid. If you have him, it's a 4 o'clock game. Just grab Knox. If you have Dalton Kincaid, grab Knox. If Kincaid's out, start Knox. If not, start Kincaid. That'd be just an easy fix. You should definitely do that this week. Sunday night game is going to be Bengals at Chargers. 47-point total. Chargers 1.5-point home favorites. For the Bengals, I would imagine that T. Higgins is good to go this week, but who knows? He's been day-to-day for like a month now. It'd be very nice if we knew that before the weekend because it's a horrible situation if you don't know that and they have the Sunday night game. But hopefully we know later this week. If he plays, the breakdown is easy. You would start Burrow, Chase, Higgins, and Brown. Wouldn't start anyone else. If Higgins is out, Mike Gesicki becomes a stronger option at tight end. He'd be a good streaming option. And then Joseph Osburton would be fine as desperation plays in like a 16-team league. I had to play them in my Dynasty League last week. I don't know how I won, but I did. They'd be desperation plays. Wouldn't probably do anything. Chase would just be a smash option. And then for the Chargers, no one grades out as a must play, especially with Gus back, because Dobbins typically grades out as their best play. With him back, a lesser play. But I'm excited about this passing attack. Herbert's a great streaming option. They've been a lot more pass heavy than people think. They look at the last game, especially, and be like, they were super run heavy. What are you talking about? But they've been winning. Their last 3 games have been an 18-point win, a 17-point win, and a 10-point win. But Tennessee was not in that game at any point. Like that was effectively another 3-score win. If this is a close game, which we're expecting it to be, we should see extreme passing volume for the Chargers. Dobbins is still a strong start even with Gus back, but Ladd McConkey is a great play at wide receiver too. If you probably only have to play him in the flex, so that's a great play. Quentin Johnston, boom bust playing the flex, but I'd be pretty excited to play him. Will Dissly seeing really strong volume even with Hurst back. He's a great streaming option at tight end. I think, again, Justin Herbert's a great option. So I'm excited about this passing attack. I think they're going to throw the ball a lot this weekend. I would be playing them if you can. Then finally, Monday Night Football. Texans at Cowboys, 42-point total. Texans 7.5-point road favorites. For the Texans, this is a great spot. They are massive favorites against a poor defense. Parsons is back, but it helps, obviously, but they need a lot more help to do well on defense. Mixon, Stroud. I'm expecting Nico back this week, so Mixon, Stroud, Nico are must starts. And then Tank is fine in the flex spot. They should have the ball a decent amount. This is a good environment. He could hit deep, but he's only a flex play. If Nico were to miss again, which I'm not expecting, but if it were to happen, then Tank Dell would be a must start as well. And you really just wouldn't play anyone else on the Texans. Then for the Cowboys side, tough to trust anyone other than CeeDee Lamb. Brutal last week, but you have to play him. Every single week CeeDee Lamb's on the field, you have to play him. Behind him, it's really just Rico Dowdle as like a low-end running back too. Definitely not excited to play him. He has the worst matchup on the team as well, but if you had no other option, he should get around, 9 to 15 opportunities, somewhere in that range. That's not awful. Jake Ferguson, also fine to play. He projects horribly because the Texans are the 3rd worst matchup for tight ends on the week, and his quarterback play is going to be trash, but I could see him racking up 4 or 5 receptions. He's not the worst play in the world at tight end. So please subscribe if you're new to the channel. Really helps me out. No Underdog video this week, so I'll see you all for the waiver wire video next week. Good luck to everyone this weekend. That'll do it for this one, and thanks for watching.